Namaskar and good morning to everyone. It's a matter of great pleasure for me to welcome you all to this conference on enhancing India-Africa cooperation. And I'm grateful to the CII for partnering with the Vivekananda International Foundation to organize in organizing this conference. I'm most grateful to Shri T.S. Tirumurti, Secretary Economic Relations, Ministry of External Affairs, who has agreed to inaugurate the conference. He is known to many of you, particularly the diplomats here. He's one of our senior most officials dealing with issues of economic relations and also political relationship with African countries. Thank you very much for finding time to be with us today. And I also want to thank the Ministry of External Affairs. Some of their officials will be joining us later in the subsequent sessions. I'm also very happy to see ambassadors and high commissioners and other diplomats from missions, African missions in Delhi. And their presence here will add a lot of prestige and value to this conference. High Commissioner of Rwanda is not here, Mr. Ernest Rwamucyo. He is representing, I hope he'll join us shortly. Okay, yeah. He'll join us soon, and he's representing the Africa Union on the dais today. I'm also grateful to the High Commissioners of Tunisia, Ethiopia, and Nigeria, who have agreed to deliver keynote addresses in subsequent sessions. Ambassador Dinkar Srivastav, Ambassador Rajiv Bhatia, Ambassador Anil Trigunath, who are all very experienced campaigners as far as Africa is concerned, economic relations is concerned. They are also with us, and they will be chairing some of the subsequent sessions in the conference. So as you can see, we have welcome. So I welcome the High Commissioner of Rwanda to this conference. So you can see that we have a very good gathering here today, very experienced people. And the purpose of this conference, which is to enhance India-Africa cooperation in various fields, is very well served by the presence of experienced people. And the CIA has also invited a number of businessmen and others who are dealing with Africa on a daily basis. So we hope to generate some good recommendations and suggestions at the end of this conference. Friends, Africa houses 6 of the world's fastest growing economies and is destined to play an important role in global and regional affairs. India, with a GDP of $2.5 trillion, has emerged as the 6th largest economy in the world. So there is a need to develop close links between the growing economies of Africa and India. We have a substantial number of substantial commonalities in terms of shared history, current challenges, and in the recent past, we have taken a number of initiatives to further and our association and cooperation. India-Africa Forum Summit of 2015 was a great success, and the announcement of a $10 billion line of credit by the Prime Minister of India marked a new beginning in our approach to engage with African countries in a more constructive manner. India, through its lines of credit, is supporting capacity building, IT, education, higher education, health, and many other projects throughout Africa. India has also contributed to peace and security in Africa through its participation in practically every UN peacekeeping operation in the continent. India is the seventh largest investor in Africa with $17 billion investment in 2015. India's two-way trade with Africa currently stands at about $55 billion. Clearly, this is not enough, and we need to do more to enhance our trade links. In order to take our cooperation forward, we need to urgently address issues such as connectivity, transport and logistics, ease of doing business, access to finance, and so on. We'll be discussing the future pathways in India-Africa relations in subsequent sessions of the conference. India is a developing country with mammoth task of improving the quality of life of hundreds of millions of people, and likewise for Africa. In India, a beginning has been made, and we would be delighted to share our experiences with African partners. There are many initiatives taken by Prime Minister Modi and his government to take the country forward on the path of development. Some of this experience may be useful for Africa as well. I just mention a few. One is financial inclusion. Until recently, hundreds of millions of people in India did not have a bank account. The government launched what they call the Jan Dhan Aadhaar and Mobile Scheme, JAM Trinity as we call it, as a result of which over 300 million people who were earlier outside the banking system have now bank accounts, which means that they have come into the financial inclusion has been achieved. And I think the latest figure, if I saw, was about 80,000 crore rupees have already been deposited in these accounts. Then the government launched a very ambitious Prime Minister's pet program of Swachh Bharat. Now, this was, India was a poor country, developing country. We needed to look at cleanliness, sanitation. And I think this program has now expanded and taken many dimensions, and it's already showing positive results. Very recently, just a few days ago, Prime Minister also launched the Prime Minister Jan Arogya Yojana, which is the world's perhaps the biggest health insurance scheme, aimed at about 500 million people, trying to provide them health insurance, highest quality of medical facilities through insurance scheme, which will work. There is a certain model, but very affordable premiums. Now, if that succeeds, this will be the world's largest scheme ever. And I think there will be huge lessons, which firstly we will be drawing from this scheme, because in part these schemes are already functioning in some of our states, but now it is being done at a nationwide state. And this, I'm sure, will be very useful for our friends in Africa as well. Under this scheme, 150,000 wellness centers will also be opened, which is like primary health centers. Some already exist, they will be upgraded, some new will be. And this will give rise to a massive, it will give massive stimulus to healthcare in the country, bring a lot of professionals, it will create jobs, it will give fillip to pharmaceutical industry and service providers. And of course, the backbone of the scheme is going to be the IT platform that is being built. And both the center and the state, they are coming together to make this scheme a success. Why I'm mentioning it here is, of course, you probably have read it all in the newspapers, and there's a lot of discussion which is going on. But could there be something that we could take some lessons and bring it in our India-Africa cooperation? Then another initiative has been of Digital India, and Digital India again has many dimensions. But I think e-governance is a very important part of Digital India program. India already has some cooperation with Africa in the IT sector. But how to bring IT into governance, how to improve delivery, and in the process, not only introduce efficiency, but also remove corruption from the system. I think this has been the takeaway from the last 4 years of our work. And this is again something which India and Africa could discuss together. And of course, the basis of this scheme is this Aadhaar scheme, which you all know. It's been in the news. In fact, today there's going to be some uh, judgment by the Supreme Court also. But this database of unique identities of more than 1 billion people based on biometrics, and that database being used for e-governance, I think that's a model that India has adopted. And it has been a successful model and something which, again, with Africa we could discuss. The Prime Minister also talks a lot about this Ujjwala scheme, which was essentially one of the flagship programs of the Modi government, where the government pledged to provide 50 million liquefied petroleum gas connections to households in the name of the women in the household. So it also served not only as a energy security scheme, but also empowerment of women. So I think there are many programs like this which probably would be useful for us with our African partners discuss these and see whether these could be included in our existing programs. India has worked closely with African partners on issues relating to the 2030 Agenda on Sustainable Development and Africa's Agenda 2063. India's development cooperation with Africa reflects African priorities and for a more prosperous Africa. And this is based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. So I think there is already a model for India-Africa cooperation, which is African priorities, sustainable development. That is a model that we are following. The frequent exchange of high-level visits between India and the African countries is a clear signal of enhancement, a clear signal that there is a commitment for further enhancement of relationships. Prime Minister Modi and President have visited numerous countries in the last few years in Africa, and they have identified several areas of cooperation which we need to work on. I think this conference will provide the opportunity, the way it has been structured, many of these issues that I have mentioned will be discussed, and I do hope that at the end of the conference, we are able to come up with some practical agenda of cooperation, and I hope that will be useful not only to stimulate a debate, but also to the policymakers in their work. So with that, I again want to welcome you all and thank you all for participating in this conference. Now, before we proceed further, there is a message from the Minister, Commerce Minister, Mr. Suresh Prabhu, a brief message. We had invited him to the conference. He had agreed, but at the last moment he could not come. But he has sent this message.
I'm very happy that India-Africa cooperation is being discussed today by all of you. I'll be happy to say that we have taken such measures for cooperation between India and Africa, which is unprecedented thanks to the leadership of Prime Minister Modi. Prime Minister invited all the heads of government, heads of state to India. And now I am following it up. I have personally created a strategy for growth of business in Africa. We had a first meeting with East Africa in Uganda, which was attended by all the East African countries. Then I went to South Africa, I had a meeting with Southern African countries. And from 6th to 9th of October, I'll be having meeting in West Africa, in Nigeria, in which we'll be inviting at least 15, 16 neighboring countries. So it's a great measure that we have taken. We have already told the Exim Bank to prepare a strategy. We have done a market research for Africa. We are providing different kind of credit, and we are working out with a very flexible credit mechanism. So Africa-India cooperation is one of our top priority. We'll take it forward in a way that Africa becomes our future partner, and we want Africa to grow in a way that Africa benefits and India benefits. We don't want only India to benefit at the expense of Africa. India-Africans have a traditional relationship. Now we must forge futuristic bond and make this as a great partnership for the 21st century. So destiny decides and destiny desires that we all must work together. We really will work with all of you. Thank you very much.
Great. So there you have the minister talking about a great partnership between India and Africa, and also outlining the strategy. And obviously, a number of initiatives have been taken, and he mentioned some meetings which have already taken place. So that is great to hear from the minister. And now I invite our Mr. T.S. Tirumurti, Secretary Economic Relations in the District of External Affairs, to deliver his inaugural address. Thank you.
Ambassador Dr. Arvind Gupta, Ambassador D.P. Srivastava, High Commissioner of Rwanda to India, Mr. Ernest Rwamucyo, Shri Tulsi Tanti, distinguished ambassadors, high commissioners, ladies and gentlemen. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to be present here for the inaugural session of Enhancing India-Africa Cooperation, organized by the Vivekananda International Foundation. And thank you very much for the invitation. It will not be an exaggeration to say that our relations with Africa are probably at an all-time high. Our engagement with Africa, which goes back into history, has now been backstopped by strong and robust links in a range of areas. Our political, security, economic, and indeed strategic engagement with Africa has been taken to a much higher trajectory in the recent past. This has, however, not happened in a vacuum. It has happened because both India and Africa desire and work towards an even more meaningful and multi-dimensional partnership. A partnership should reflect the times we live in and should also be responsive to the needs and aspirations of our countries. I would like to underline that with respect to India and Africa, this is already happening. This is also the reason why Prime Minister Modi, in his speech before the Ugandan parliament, outlined the 10 principles, which will continue to guide India's engagement with Africa. He stressed that Africa will be at the top of our priorities and our engagement will be sustained and regular. The fact that 26 visits at the level of Honorable President, Honorable Vice President, and Prime Minister have already taken place to Africa in the last 4 years attests to this priority. An area which has assumed a certain degree of urgency in the recent past has been defense and security. There is considerable mutuality of interest here. The rise of terrorism as the single most important factor affecting India and Africa has given an added thrust to this mutuality of security interest. African countries have themselves taken the initiative jointly and individually, like G5 Sahel and the multinational joint task force, etc., to tackle this menace. India's contribution to promote security in Africa over the years is well known, including the yeoman service rendered by the Indian peacekeeping forces in Africa since our first mission in Congo in 1960. 70% of the Indian peacekeepers who have made the supreme sacrifice have laid down their lives in Africa. Consequently, it may come as no surprise that in the face of increasing cross-border terrorism, piracy, armed robbery at sea, hijacking of ships, etc., India should be a natural partner with Africa to fight this together. Our bilateral security engagement with African countries has been substantially stepped up, and we are now in a unique position of being able to share our expertise as well as experience on security issues. As Prime Minister mentioned in the 10 principles, we will strengthen our cooperation and mutual capabilities in combating terrorism and extremism, keeping our cyberspace safe and secure, and supporting the UN in advancing and keeping peace. We will also work with Africa to keep the oceans open and free and work together to ensure that Africa does not once again turn into a theater of rival ambition. Friends, on another note, we now have one of our most robust relations with Africa in development partnership as well as in trade and investment. The economic indicators are clear that the macroeconomic policies being implemented in many countries in Africa are bearing fruit. Contradictions, of course, remain. As the Namibian president said, Africa consumes what it does not produce and produces what it does not consume. India can certainly help to correct this anomaly without in any way disrupting the economic or the financial well being of the African countries and without distorting their national priorities. In his 10 principles, our Prime Minister was clear that our development partnership will be guided by African priorities and that it will be on terms that will be comfortable for Africa, which will liberate the potential of Africa and not constrain its future. We will rely on African talent and skills, build local capacity, and create local opportunities. Currently, we are implementing 180 lines of credit worth over US dollars 11 billion in over 40 countries in Africa. We have just signed a grant agreement to build the first of the Mahatma Gandhi Convention Centers in Niger in time for the AU summit to be held next year in Niamey. It is important to underline the fact that we are ensuring that our terms for assistance do not burden the country concerned or result in its indebtedness or infringe on its sovereignty, but is entirely demand driven and fits in with their priorities. India and Africa present an exemplary model for South South cooperation. The Prime Minister also indicated that India will keep its markets open and make it easier and more attractive to trade with us, and that we will support our industry to invest in Africa. Indian companies have invested over $54 billion. India has also focused on the SME sector in Africa, including in setting up entrepreneurial development and business incubation centers. Our trade with Africa jumped by 21% this year. Africa's exports to India are also growing. Since sub regional and regional integration in Africa, and now the continental integration under the FTA, have been gaining momentum, India is willing to play the role of an important partner in this emerging scenario. Our private sector has been playing a pivotal role in this context and will enhance their presence. I'm therefore pleased that many of the issues being taken up for discussion in this conference are economic, finance, and commerce related. You have tried to focus on the roadblocks like transport and logistic costs, finance, etc., which is crucial in taking this aspect of our engagement higher. It will also interest you to know that the first India West Africa Business Conclave is going to be held on the 8th and 9th of October in Abuja, Nigeria, where our Commerce and Industry Minister and our Minister of State for External Affairs, Shri M.J. Akbar, will be attending. Ambassador Arvind Gupta has just now touched on a few developments in India which we could usefully share with our African partners. And you'll be happy to know, sir, that we have already started working on some of these aspects with Africa. Friends, just 2 weeks ago, External Affairs Minister witnessed the signing of the MOU between my ministry and the TCIL to establish the second phase of the Pan-African e-network for tele-education and telemedicine, e-Vidya Bharati and e-Arogya Bharati between India and Africa. This is a much more ambitious phase with ramped up technology, user friendly interface, greater coverage, closer interface between institutions in Africa and India, and enhanced monitoring. This is also in keeping with the 10 principles, which is to harness India's experience with digital revolution to support Africa's development, particularly in education and health, and mainstream the marginalized. India would be happy to equip the youth of Africa for their place in this digital age. You are aware of the extensive capacity building and training programs which we have undertaken in Africa, encompassing inter alia, cutting edge science, technology, innovation, and research. Every year, over 8,000 African youth are trained in a diverse set of programs, including in our flagship program, iTech. This only goes on to show that the more and more one tends to measure partnerships purely in monetary terms, that less and less do we really capture the nature and the depth of our relations between countries. The Indian e visa facility has been extended to cover more than 25 African countries, though there is much more we can do by way of enhancing air connectivity between India and Africa. We are confident that with the opening of 18 new missions in Africa, India's physical presence will substantially increase. Friends, Africa is on the move, and India will continue to play its role to contribute to Africa realizing its full potential. Thank you.
So I think it was a excellent uh, resume of what we are doing in Africa and in which direction we are proceeding. And you could see that already the India-Africa relationship is taking on new hues, new colors, and new dimensions, keeping in mind the current requirements of both Africa and India, and the emphasis on African priorities in our development model. I think that's extremely important so that our cooperation remains mutually beneficial and acceptable. So thank you very much for that speech, and we hope that you'll give us a soft copy. We'll try to put it on our website also for wider circulation. Now, may I request Our Excellency Ernest Rwamucyo, I hope I pronounced it correctly, to kindly make your remarks.
Thank you. Good morning. Mr. T.S. Tirumurti, Secretary Economic Relations, Minister of External Affairs, Dr. Arvind Gupta, Director, Vivekananda International Foundation, Mr. Tanti, Chairman, CII Africa Committee and Chairman, Managing Director, Suzlon Energy Limited, Excellencies, Ambassadors, High Commissioners, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to start by thanking the Vivekananda International Foundation and CII for organizing this important conference. I also thank you for inviting me to speak and be part of this discussion. This is indeed a very important conference, and it's happening at a very critical time. As already mentioned, there is truly a further strengthened momentum in India-Africa partnership. We share a very, very long history, as mentioned, a history of trade, investment, commerce, and people-to-people connection. There is a deep and enduring connection between the African continent and the Indian subcontinent, and this goes back centuries. We look at the Indian Ocean. It has always been, instead of being a barrier, has actually been a vast bridge of connectivity, which has facilitated trade and movement of people and goods across the two sub-regions. We are talking of a period of renewed engagement because of several indicators that have already been highlighted and some that I'll come back to. But I wanted to emphasize that this friendship between India and Africa is further cemented by a shared history, a history of colonialism, a shared history of the struggle for independence, decolonization, but also a focus on the future built on self-reliance, economic prosperity, and wealth creation for our people. These are very, very important bond that has endured a very long time. And we continue to work together as we look into the future. And there is a lot that has been happening, especially this renewed momentum coming in the last few years, building on a long history as was already mentioned. So it's a very, very important conference that we take stock of how far we've come, what we've shared, but more importantly, a focus into the future and a shared future. I believe that in this long journey that we've traveled, the turning point was, apart from several points in the journey, I think a major turning point in the most recent history was 2015, when Prime Minister Modi hosted the third India Africa Forum Summit here in Delhi in a different style by inviting all the 53 heads of state and heads of government of Africa to convene in Delhi and to discuss how to take this partnership further forward. The participation was very impressive, but more so the commitments that were made, and the focus of those commitments in terms of areas that are of core priority to the development of Africa, especially the financing for infrastructure development, for agriculture, for technology transfer, for capacity building. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me just to point out a few indicators at the risk of repetition that show that actually the momentum has been recreated. Already mentioned about 26 visits of the Prime Minister of India, the President, the Vice President of India, and other high-level officials to Africa. But this has been reciprocated by over 30 visits of African heads of state and heads of government to India over the last 3 years alone. The most recent visit of the Prime Minister of Rwanda, or the Prime Minister of India to Rwanda and Uganda and South Africa just a couple of months ago, less than a month ago actually, is one I'll take as an example to highlight that these have not been just visits, but these have been very, very substantive visits. Visits where there have been concrete outcomes. If we take the example of Rwanda alone, in July, and Mr. Tirumurti was the signatory to many of the agreements. We signed 8 agreements in different areas: agriculture, road development, irrigation, building of special economic zones, defense cooperation, culture exchange, very core areas of substantive engagement between the two countries. We signed lines of credit of 200 million US dollars. The same happened in Uganda, because from Rwanda, the next visit was Uganda. Again, very, very substantive visit with very, very concrete outcomes. So these are not just political visits or visits to as courtesy, but very, very significant engagement. If you look at what have happened in the easing of visa regime and the visits that are happening across India and Africa, I was looking at the statistics and noted that in 2017 alone, about 30 million Indians visited African countries in 1 year alone. Today, when we talk of Rwanda, India is the second largest source of tourists to Rwanda. Tourism is the mainstay of our economy, and we think that this is going to continue to grow. We are still only scratching at the tip of the iceberg because, of course, 30 million Indian visitors to Africa is very small if you compare with the population of 1.2 billion people. which means that there is still huge untapped potential. Mr. Tirumurti mentioned the opening of 18 new embassies, bringing the number of Indian missions present in Africa to 47. This is an evidence of much deeper engagement and very welcome to us in terms of the services that we receive. The embassy, the High Commission to Kigali was just announced a few months ago, and it's already operational as we talk now. The High Commissioner designate is already in terms, which means that the commitments are also being made with decisive action, and that's very, very important. The figures in terms of investments are also impressive. You mentioned that Dr. Arvind, that India is the seventh actually largest contributor to FDI flow into Africa now. My statistics I was looking at this morning says actually it's grown to be the fifth largest investor on the African continent, which means that even numbers are moving faster than we even can keep up with. You look at the digital divide, which has been narrowed in terms of communication, in terms of exchange, in terms of air connectivity. Just last year, in addition to a number of flights that are coming to India, Rwanda launched the Rwanda Air flight to India, which has been running very, very effectively. But from what I understand, there are two other countries that are already in the process of actually establishing air connectivity between India and the continent. And these are core countries on the African shore of our continent. So, ladies and gentlemen, we can go on and on and on and find supporting evidence that when we talk of renewed momentum, it is real and it is happening. I'll later highlight maybe what we need to do to further strengthen this, because as I keep emphasizing, we are still way below what we could achieve. I think more could be achieved. But since I'm speaking also in the capacity of the African Union, I should take a few minutes to say what we are doing as the African continent to position ourselves to benefit more from this partnership. Because certainly, if we are to benefit optimally, we need to be prepared to even engage more robustly. Since this year, Rwanda is the chair of the African Union, but before His Excellency President Kagame took over as chairperson of the African Union, he had been tasked earlier by his peers to spearhead a reform process aimed at creating the AU, reforming the AU into a robust and more efficient organization. When he was assigned that task, he realized that it could not be a one-man task. So he set up a very, very solid team of African experts and leaders to work with him on the reform. So they worked really hard over a year to come up with the reforms that were presented in 2016 and approved. And the reforms that were proposed focused on 4 core priorities. One area is institutional realignment, to ensure that the priorities of the African Union are actually aligned to its core aspiration. And the aim was to make the organization much more robust, efficient, and enable it to deliver on its mandate. And there are several proposals that have been proposed by the team, by the president and his team in this direction. And many of them have been approved by the peers and undergoing implementation. The second focus of the priority of the reform was connecting with the Africans and the aspiration of the African people. This was aimed at making the organization much more relevant to the African people and to be able to deliver on continent-wide public goods and services that would ensure that people actually see benefit and are connected to the organization. In a nutshell, the objective is to make the organization a people-centered organization. And when you talk of people-centered organization, the focus is on youth, inclusiveness of the youth, empowerment of women, and ensuring that actually they are brought into the mainstream of the organization, not just in its leadership, but in entire aspects of its activities. Again, several proposals have also been made along this line, and many are being implemented. This includes easing of free movement of people and services. There's also there was need to, as a third objective to operation to make the organization operational, to give it operational efficiency and effectiveness. This is to ensure that the AU as an organization, which has the mandate to ensure economic integration of the country and inclusive economic growth, and that the implementation of the Vision 2063 is realized. So this again, a lot of structural changes have been proposed as part of this reform agenda to ensure that the organization is more lean, is more focused, focuses on more prioritized aspects of its mandate, and that a lot of the organizations, small and large, that had been scattered are all pulled together. And I think this proposal also has been well received by the peers and under implementation. Again, I didn't want to go into the details of this reform because the information is out there in the public domain, but just to highlight another important aspect of this reform was ensuring sustainable financing of the organization, because there's a realization that the organization is challenged in the way it's financed. It's an organization that has largely been dependent on donors, and that there was need for the Africans to pull together and come up with a clear, coherent strategy to ensure that the organization can be self-financing. For this, I think they came up with a practical proposal of enable countries to contribute 0.2% of duties that are levied on eligible goods and services that are brought into a country. I'm happy to report that since this reform was adopted, this is being implemented. There are quite a number of countries that are beginning to collect these levies and actually to forward them to the AU to finance activities of the AU, and it is already having an impact on the organization and its financing. Now, the thrust of these reforms is very huge, very large, very ambitious. Largely, there is consensus on these reforms, and largely a number of them are being implemented. Certainly, it is a huge organization, it's a huge bureaucracy, and takes a while to ensure that everybody is on board and that every aspect of the reform is being implemented. But what we see since this momentum also, and since the focus on this reform by the African heads of state working together as teams, not just under the current chairperson, but working together across the whole region with the heavy lifting shared equally, there are some significant breakthroughs that have come. Apart from the aspect of financing that I already mentioned, where the levies are already being collected, but the signing of the Africa Continental Free Trade Area in Kigali, which created the largest free trade area since the creation of the World Trade Organization, is a very, very significant move. It was already signed by 44 countries. I think I haven't checked the count as of today, but more countries have signed since then. And the ratification is also going on because countries are also moving ahead to ratify this agreement. This will be very significant and game-changing for the African continent. One, in terms of intra-Africa, intra-continental trade, this is very, very significant. But also in terms of positioning Africa to be able to trade with the rest of the world and attract foreign direct investment, this is also of critical importance. And I would believe that this movement that has started is not going to stop. I think there is a lot that is going to be happening. But this is not alone, because this was also accompanied by the signing of the protocol on free movement and the beginning of the issuance of the African passport, which is a very, very significant, because it's one aspect to open up the trade and to consolidate the market, but it's another thing to allow people to move freely. And I think these reforms are quite critical. Now, the onus is on us to keep the momentum, to keep working on these reforms and to bring them to logical conclusion. The positive point here is that India has already indicated that once the Africa Continental Free Trade Area comes into effect, that India will be ready to be one of the first partners to this initiative. And I think that is already a realization that if we can put our work together and if we can organize ourselves, that we are going to attract much more partnership and which will be more mutually beneficial. It's easier to deal with a large market. African market is also larger than 1 billion people. So if we can trade with the India, which is 1.2 billion people, and other countries across the globe, I think we are bound to benefit much more. Now, tying together India and Africa, I think, as we said, the history that is shared is long. The journey that has been traveled is long. There have been so many milestones along the way. The momentum is there, has created, as we've seen from the evidence. What does the future hold for us? I think there are a lot of untapped potential. Because if you look at the size of the African economy put together and the size of the Indian economy put together, you have two huge giants coming together to actually create a huge economic partnership that is not built on a new friendship, but is built on a very long and enduring connectivity. And I think we need to work together to ensure that we keep this momentum going, but that we make it much more beneficial and much more fruitful. What are the areas where we still have gaps? In investment, we still have a gap. We say India is the fifth largest investor in Africa now. If you look at the volume of investment, maybe around 50 something billion dollars cumulative, I think this could triple. This should be really tripled. We should be moving. To me, I think that given the size of the Indian economy and the size of the African economy put together, bringing together almost 4.3 billion people, I think we should be moving beyond looking at a cumulative investment of $50 billion over the last few decades and moving further. There is also a lot we share. Africa still has huge amount of resources that India also needs, but that India also has the capacity to add value. Because when you talk of the trade also, it is still skewed in one way because we are mostly sending raw materials to India, while India is sending finished high-value products to Africa, which means that there needs to be some balance. Instead of sending crude oil, unprocessed raw materials, unprocessed agricultural produce, I think we should be looking at tapping into the potential of India with its huge population of entrepreneurs and growing capital to actually, and technology also, to add value to this so that we create a mutually beneficial trading regime. So the trade and the investment should grow in volume. That's very important. There's still room for growth, but it's also grow in quality. And I think we can achieve that. And I think here, Indian private sector is challenged because you have the capacity to invest. You have the resources. You have the know-how. You have the manpower. Africa also needs that. And we have the right environment for you to operate. If you look at most African economies, many of them are free market economies. We are not protective. So if we are free market economies and you are entrepreneurs, the politicians have cleared the way because we talk of these high-level visits from India to Africa, from Africa to India, and the goodwill of the politician and the commitments made at the India-Africa Forum Summit. It means that the politicians have actually given a green signal, a very green signal, and they've built the right relationship. So we have to use that now to create wealth, to create jobs, to actually go into manufacturing. There is also, I think, a gap we still have. I think this is important for Mr. Tirumurti and also for all of us, especially the ambassadors and the High Commissioner here, that the commitments under the India-African Forum Summit, now that it's almost 3 years after the commitments were made, we need to move much faster on their full implementation. There is good movement on the concessional lines of credit. Still, I think we can do more in that area. I think there is good utilization. There is good disbursement. But again, more could be done in faster disbursement and also in more targeted investment. But we also know it's demand driven. So we've got to also put in the demand. And then I think the response, we've worked with the Exim Bank to work out on fast tracking implementation of already approved projects. So where projects, concessional lines of credit have approved, we've worked a system to try and reduce the process so that disbursement and execution is quicker. Based on the Rwanda model, based on the project that we are running in Rwanda, we have built actually a good model. But I think more could be done. I'm looking at the 50,000 scholarship. We have a huge interest in education. I think if we take stock of the 50,000 scholarship which were announced in 2015 and compare with the scholarship that India was giving before, we might find that actually we have not started to strategize better on how to make full utilization of this 50,000 scholarship and ensure that we actually use them for high-end masters, undergraduate, PhD programs, apart from the usual high-tech programs. Technology transfer. I think technology transfer is an area where Africa has a huge need. We somehow, when I look at a country like Rwanda, we are still spending huge amount of money on acquiring technologies from countries that offer very expensive technology that is not easily adaptable to our situation. And sometimes that money does not yield as much as it should. I think we should be working in India in some of these areas of technology transfer. We should take advantage of the digitization, I think. It's very, very important. We are not utilizing it as much as we should. And I think there is a lot that we could do in this area, and especially on the areas that Dr. Arvind mentioned, e-governance, different aspects of e-governance. I think for Mr. Tirumurti, I think there has been already expressed demand on the ADAL model to be adopted by some of the African countries. I think India might need to work out around the legal issues, because there are some legal issues that now I think hinder the sharing of not necessarily technology, but at least of working together on getting the ADAL model, especially where it links with the identification system and then the delivery of services, because I think there's a law that binds that, but the demand is there. I know we have had some discussions around that. Last but not least, industrialization. I think Africa needs jobs. Africa needs value addition, and the jobs are going to come from manufacturing, from industrialization, and there's no better partner to work with in this area than India. I think we have huge potential. Sorry, I'm taking a lot more time than I had intended to talk to, but when you talk of India and Africa, there is always a lot to talk about, but I'm sure there is a whole day of discussions. I wanted to thank the organizers again and say that we have room for further engagement, and I think there is a lot that we still can do together. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Excellency, for that talk and speech that you have given. You've given us lots of ideas, but I think two takeaways for me were, one, that Africa Union itself is now in the process of reform, and this will be a new Africa which is emerging. So we'll have to find perhaps new ways of dealing with Africa. And this FTA, the free trade agreement that you are signing, and I think India would be the partner. That's a very big development. So naturally, there is a need for us to understand how Africa Union will reform itself and how Africa itself will be transformed as a result. And the second takeaway is about, you mentioned a number of areas and the need for moving faster on some of the issues that we have already agreed upon. But I'm sure that's a work in progress, and our agencies and our ministries will take note of that. So thank you very much for that very exhaustive and a very good speech in which you have outlined some ideas for the future. Now, may I request Mr. Tulsi Tanti to kindly make his remarks. Mr. Tanti is the chairman of CII Africa Committee and chairman and managing director of Suzlon Energy Limited.
Mr. T.S. Tirumurti, Secretary, Economics Relations, Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India. His Excellency Mr. Ernest Rwamucyo, the High Commissioner of Rwanda to India and representative of Africa Union Chair. Dr. Arvind Gupta, Director, Vivekananda International Foundations, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. Very good morning to all of you, and it's a great pleasure for me to address these events and to take it forward of today's full day. We are delighted that we have a Mr. T.S. Tirumurti, Secretary's Ministry of External Affairs, at the opening session of this important conference on enhancing the India-Africa cooperations. The relationship with Africa had gained the momentum that followed the Africa Forum submitted held October 2015, which was attended 41 head of the states of the government from the Africa. Since then, the President, Vice President, and the Prime Minister of India has visited 25 African countries. India has received the 12 heads of the government and states from the Africa since it's hosted India-Africa Forum Summit. Our Honorable Minister Sri Suresh Prabhu, the Ministry of Commerce and Industries, during his address at the 13th CIA Exim Bank Conclave on India and Africa project partnership held in the New Delhi, earlier in the head and announced about the setting up the non-lapsable Africa India Development Funds and the National Exports Insurance Account. The India Africa Development Funds has invested as a non-stop one-stop the shops for the bilateral and India-Africa projects, and also to provide consultancy project for their planning for the executions. In addition, Minister has mentioned that the export credit guarantee corporations would create a national export insurance accounts where the insurance will cover the risk specifically associated with each country. I understand the ministry is expected to join us later during the day, and we look forward to hearing more about these initiatives. As far as the Indian industries is concerned, the projections for the growth prospects of both the India and Africa is upbeat, and a new landscape and entrepreneurship, innovations and thinking out of the box in the emerging. This trend opens a new doors for the widening acres of the economics and development partnership between India and Africa. The fueling appetite to do the more with each other, India can aspire to increase its engagement with the Africa by developing its presence in the sector where India has a unique value proposition and a huge competitive edge and the state-of-art technology that can be for African nations have high needs such as IT, the most of the services, the agricultures, the infrastructures, the pharmaceuticals and hospitals, and the textile industries, the power and renewable energy, and consumer goods. I think it's an enormous space and opportunity for Indian entrepreneurs to establish their shops and business and transfer the technology to make a win-win trade benefit for both the nations. As you know, our Prime Minister has established a very ambitious plan for the renewable energy space in a country to bring the global economy sustainable and to mitigate the climate risk. The best beauty is that India has set the target of 227 gigawatt by 2022. And because of that, the large scale technology and economic scale has developed in the country. And today, the cost of energy in India is produced by the renewable energy is the most cheapest source of energy compared to any other source of the resource. And it's a $4 to $5 cents. This cost is even not available in China also, irrespective of the scale of the China. So we are happy to transfer this technology and expertise and value-added energy solutions to make the manufacturing base strong, established in all the Africa continent. I will tell you one example which is very successful. We have built 150 megawatt the wind project in South Africa in the Eastern Cape, with the strong cooperation support from Exim Bank 5 years before, and it was a very successful project and cooperation. And today, when I see the both side of the governments has good aspiration to create a good value for each other, I am see the more and more the renewable space we can able to do the great. Not only that, we are bringing the next generation of the technology of the water also, which can be the future need of the whole Africa continent. And this water technology will be run from the renewable energy source. So it's a really eco solutions for the energy, and the water. The regional economic integration is extremely important. The promoting the regional economic integration and connectivity will be the game changer in the enhancing the continent's attractiveness for the foreign investment, including India investment promoting Africa as a single market and the single investment destination was manifold advantage. In this regard, the India industries welcome the signing of the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement by 44 African countries at the Africa Union Summit, which was held under the chairmanship of His Excellency Paul Kagame, the Honorable Presidents of Rwanda. The free trade will be a watershed in the Africa's quest for integration, a key goal identified in Africa Agenda 2063 as it is could be the bring over 1.2 billion populations together with the same markets and it really add value for the both the nation and within the Africa continent. Going forward, if we see the how the private sector and entrepreneurships of the India can be add lot of value. The looking ahead, I believe there is an enormous potentiality in area of the knowledge, industries, and services. The huge potentiality of the skill developments to create a value-added manufacturing and the products in the Africa. First, at focus is required the skill development. Also, there is a high need of including the health and tourism. India is in the proven strength in the training and the capacity building looks set to do the more in promoting the human capital developments through the India Africa skill development missions. The demand for the quality healthcare is rising across Africa, and we hope Africa continents will incentivize the Indian healthcare measures to set up a more hospitals and medical colleges and all the related manufacturing capabilities of the medical product. In addition, India investment trade, the approach could help the sustain and dynamic trade growth between India and Africa, help extend the trade both in terms of the number of partners, in order also range of the goods and service traded. The investment for the joint venture between the countries would open up the route of the enhancing the goods trends the while business will network and forward the deals, harnessing energies of the youths in a continent with the predominantly the young population will be the critical factor in spurring the Africa resilience. Here is therefore the huge potential in the forging the partnership in shaping the robust ecosystems for the entrepreneurships, job creation, and for the new startups in the Africa. In the end, let me once again understand the CII will continue to be the forefront of the shaping the brighter future for the India-Africa economic partnerships, supports and assigning the vision of prosperous, the integrated, united Africa, which is led by Africa and the people of the Africa. The stage is set for taking the India-Africa economic partnership into the higher trajectory. It takes two to the tango. It's lets much our steps to create a new symphony of the India-Africa partnerships. There is enormous opportunities available between both the nations. We have to create a clear roadmaps and priorities and actionable actions so that we can really bring the tangible impact for the society of India and Africa. Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mr. Tanti. I think it was it's very heartening to hear that the Indian industry is keen to partner with Africa and that you are taking note of the changes that are taking place there and the opportunities that are arising. And your mention of combining renewable energy with water technologies and providing eco-friendly solutions, and that too at affordable prices. I think that's a good model that we should certainly work on. And the fact that now we have a continental free trade agreement, I think Indian industry can certainly take advantage of that. So we could discuss some specifics later in the conference. Thank you very much for this session. And once again, I want to thank Mr. Tirumurti, Excellency Ernest, Rwamucyo and Mr. Tanti and everyone else here for being present.